is Shelley Chesler, and I'm also an instructor for the University of Washington's Engage program. Graduate students, including myself, typically get a really specialized type of training in how to do a very specific kind of research. The Engage program provides another type of training that graduate students rarely get. We teach our students how to talk about their science in a way that is engaging, enlightening, and informative. You can learn more about our innovative program at engage-science.com. And now to our second guest. Julie Weicheld is a master's student in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences. She studies the mosquitoes around Seattle and other areas of Washington state, specifically how they are affected by climate and other environmental factors. Please give a warm welcome to Julie.
Thanks, Shelley, for that nice intro. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie, and I'm a master's student in environmental health. And yes, I study mosquitoes. So, the thing about mosquitoes is nobody really likes them. In fact, I just have one thought on mosquitoes, and that is that they ruin everything. So I'm from the East Coast, from around Philadelphia, and we have a lot of mosquitoes there. In the summertime, bug spray is a must. My mom told me a story of when she was a girl. They went on a camping trip. They went to Chincoteague Island, which is a small island off of Virginia. And they were having a great trip with their campfire and their s'mores, and then they went to go to bed, and as the mosquitoes on Chincoteague often do, they started biting. And they started biting so much that the family said, okay, we give up, we're packing up the tent and going to a hotel. So while I can't deny that I might do this on a normal camping trip, the mosquitoes came and they ruined everything. So really, anything you were trying to do back home in the summer, the mosquitoes were always there trying to get in on your fun. So camping was ruined, glamping was ruined, picnicking, fireworks, no matter where you were or what you were doing, the mosquitoes were always there and they were always ruining everything. So I thought, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to go to Seattle, Washington. I've heard from people there that you can sit on your porch in the summertime, door open, not worry about getting bit. So I started graduate school at the University of Washington, and I sat down with my advisor, anxious to find out what my master's project was going to be. And he said, Julie, you're going to do a project on mosquitoes. And I was like, okay, what kind of project on mosquitoes? And do I get to kill them? And he said, well, you're going to look at the mosquitoes right here in Washington. And I couldn't help but think, what's the point? There aren't that many mosquitoes here in Washington. And after all that time I spent putting up with them on the East Coast, moved to the West Coast, and of course they had to come here and ruin graduate school. And now I'm not completely oblivious. I knew worldwide mosquitoes were causing a lot of problems. Malaria, there are 200 million cases a year. Dengue, fever, there are 100 million cases and that number is rising. But these vector-borne diseases, as we sometimes call them, occur in the tropical or subtropical regions of the world, not in the US, let alone in Washington. But then in 2009, something happened. Somebody went to Florida and they got dengue fever. Now, it's not uncommon for people in Florida to have dengue, but that's because they went somewhere like India or Africa and came back. But this time, the person went to Key West, Florida, never left the country, and got dengue fever. And in the years following, more and more cases of dengue were popping up around Florida, with people having symptoms like rash, fever, headache, and joint and muscle pain. And these people never left the country. And just last summer, a brand new disease called chikungunya virus someone got in the US. And this was the first time that disease had ever been reported in the US without someone having left the country. In 1999, we had a different mosquito-borne virus appear, and that was West Nile virus. It showed up in New York and then quickly spread down the East Coast over to the Midwest, and pretty soon the entire country was seeing cases of West Nile virus. So what's causing these diseases to spread so rapidly and causing these new ones to emerge in new places? Well, it's likely a combination of many factors, one of which is climate change. And I'm sure you're familiar with the topic of climate change, that our Earth is warming and will continue to do so. In the Pacific Northwest specifically, we may see up to an 8-degree increase in temperature by 2070. And those greatest changes in temperature are supposed to occur in the summer. That's mosquito season. Specifically, we're going to see increased temperature and decreased precipitation. So now it was starting to make sense to me. This is why we should look at mosquitoes in Washington. What if the environment changes and makes it a more desirable place for them to live and for these diseases to thrive? In addition to climate change, we have land cover, which simply refers to the landscape. Here we have a map of Seattle where the red represents developed areas. The darker the red, the more developed. And then we also have some green for parks and yellow for fields. But because we're not happy with the same city we had 50 years ago, or even 10 or 5, we're constantly changing the land cover. And here, wherever you see black, those are the areas where Seattle has become more developed in the past 10 years. So we can look at these maps and see if there are any associations with mosquito numbers. Are there more in the developed areas or the parks or the wetlands? Where do they like to live? To really understand this, though, we need to tune into Mosquito TV's True Life and take a look inside the life of a mosquito. So here we go. There's several stages of a mosquito's life, and one that we're all very familiar with is the blood meal. And up here we have our female mosquito, and she's buzzing around ready to have some mosquito children. But before she can do that, she needs to take a blood meal. So she flies over to this human, sucks up some blood, is able to digest that, and now produce her eggs. And then she needs a place to lay them, so she decides this bucket of dirty standing water looks like a good place. And inside that bucket, we have an egg, and often the egg is on an egg raft. And these rafts float on top of the surface. So it can be in a bucket, or it can be somewhere like a wetland or a puddle on the grass. And the eggs hatch into larvae, which live in the water, then develop into a pupa and eventually an adult. And this process takes different amount of times depending on the mosquito species, but also depending on the temperature. So we might say normally this takes 10 days. But if the temperature gets a little warmer, we might see it taking only 9 or 8 or 7, and suddenly we have more and more mosquitoes emerging at any given time, ready to bite and possibly transmit disease. We can think of mosquitoes and temperature a bit like we think of cooking. So when you cook something, you turn up the heat to make it cook a little faster. And you might see that's working well, so you turn up a little more, and then you look back and your food is burned. And likewise with mosquitoes, some heat is good. So in a place like Western Washington where it's relatively cool, if the temperatures increase, we can see more mosquitoes. But in a place where it's hot, like sub-Saharan Africa, too much heat can be bad, and we'll see a decrease. Likewise with precipitation, some rain is good because we now have these buckets and containers filling up with water, puddles forming, get some mosquito larvae in there. But if it continues to rain, that bucket may overflow and the mosquito larvae will get flushed out and die. But what about the land cover? And how might the land cover interact with climate to affect the mosquitoes? So here we have a map of Washington State's land cover. We have our cities, like Seattle and Spokane, where there's lots of man-made containers, storm drains for the mosquitoes. We have the Olympic Peninsula, where it's very rainy and wet. We have the desert-like environment of eastern Washington, where it's hot and dry. And then in some of those areas, we have turned them into agriculture. So we have orchards and other crops. And these areas in particular are very important for mosquitoes because in order to have an effective orchard or farm, you need to water your plants. And oftentimes this creates standing irrigation water. And the mosquitoes have noticed. And it puts these areas at particularly high risk because mosquito populations like to live there. So in Washington, we have all these beautiful different land covers, but the way that they'll interact with the climate will be a little different in each one. So if it's raining, in Seattle, we might see an increase in numbers because we now have these containers filling up. In the Olympic Peninsula, we may actually see a decrease, though, because it was already so wet there, and now it's just too wet for them. In eastern Washington, because it's so warm there and we now have these puddles, they can multiply rapidly, and we'll see a big increase. And then in the agricultural areas, we may see a really big increase because there was already that mosquito population established, and now they can just continue to grow. So to conclude Mosquito TV's True Life, we're going to look at a tale of two mosquitoes, because mosquitoes have their own preferences for what kind, mosquito species have their own preferences for what kind of climate or land cover they like. And we're going to look at Washington's two most important West Nile virus vectors, Culex pipiens and Culex tarsalis. So I think we can agree in the world we have city folk and country folk, and they're a little different, like different things. And we can think of our mosquitoes in this way, where pipiens is our city mosquito and tarsalis is our country or our rural mosquito. And we'll give them some props so we can remember them better. So pipiens is our urban mosquito. It likes to sleep and rest on buildings during the day. It likes to go out at night, bite some people. Culex tarsalis prefers things a bit more natural. It likes to be in wetlands, upland, grassy areas, especially those agricultural areas with the standing water. Culex pipiens really likes its water dirty to lay its eggs in. So if it's a bucket or a cup you left out overnight, really the dirtier the better. Whereas Culex tarsalis likes its water cleaner. In fact, it prefers fresh rain that forms these puddles on the ground. And in regards to the amount of precipitation, Culex pipiens just wants some, because like I said, it likes its water dirty, so it doesn't want it getting too diluted out or overflowing. Whereas Culex tarsalis likes enough rain. It wants more because it wants enough to create these pools that will last the summer season. So what do we know about mosquitoes so far in Washington? Most of what I said we think will be true, but we need to know for sure with data. So we have to go out into the mosquitoes' environment and study them. And we can sample their larvae in the water here. So I'm sampling at Magnuson Park after a rainstorm. And then we can also sample the adults with these traps you'll see on that tree. And on top of this trap is a bucket that we fill with dry ice. And that might seem a little weird to you, but it's because mosquitoes are attracted to carbon dioxide, our breath, and we trick them because carbon dioxide is the solid form of CO2. And the mosquito will fly over and be attracted to that and then go into the trap where it can't get out. And I'll collect these traps and count them and see what kind of mosquitoes are there. And then, yes, I do get to kill them. So when we have enough, we can enough data, we can make a map something like this where we see what mosquitoes are where and how many there are of them. And we're seeing what we would expect: a lot of Culex pipiens in Seattle, a lot of Culex tarsalis out in the eastern Washington. And then in an area where we have a lot of data and people are at particularly high risk, like the Tri-Cities area, because they are so close to these agricultural areas, there have been mosquitoes testing positive for West Nile in human cases consistently over the past few years. In these areas, we can make a risk map, which can be used to alert people when transmission is high and can be used for better mosquito control. And then we can also look at the mosquito numbers and how they may change over a season. So this is the Seattle area. The yellow circles are where mosquitoes have been sampled. The bigger the circle, the more mosquitoes were caught there. And we can look at it over the summer and see, you know, when are the weeks that I might want to make sure I'm wearing bug spray, or what is the week I want to stay inside. I think it might be that one for me. So we hope to add more data points to this map so that we can better understand the mosquito populations, and if climate change does in fact have an effect on their populations, we can be better prepared to deal with this challenge. So in the end, I'd say this mosquito project was very interesting to work on, and I'm glad I got the opportunity to do it. So maybe I'll give my friend another chance and say, mosquitoes don't always ruin everything. So thanks to my thesis committee, to Engage in the College of the Environment, to Town Hall for hosting this speaker series, and I can take any questions.
Might I say, haven't they genetically changed a mosquito where it's become like sterile, wasn't the term, or where it wasn't able to reproduce?
Yeah, so that's one of the things they're playing with, and what they're trying to do there is focus specifically on the males so that they can release like a sterile male population, and then they won't be able to continue to breed.
That's ongoing, or it hasn't started?
They're doing that, not at this university that I know of. In other areas, they have a lot of trouble doing the field test, though, because people don't like the idea of a GMO mosquito being released. Yeah, but they are working on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I also lived on the East Coast for a while, and then I moved to the Seattle area. And one of the things I love about the Seattle area is there is, at least in my experience, not that many mosquitoes here. Mm-hmm. Why are there fewer mosquitoes in this area than there are in many places on the East Coast?
Yeah, so that's a very good question that we are all wondering. I think a lot of it has to do with some of the summer climate patterns and the environment. So I know a lot on the East Coast, you'll have, in the summertime, you'll have these like thunderstorms. It'll be really hot. You'll get rain building up after that. Here, our summers are particularly dry, and I think maybe the lack of rain might be contributing to that. But that's just things I've been thinking about. Yeah? Mm-hmm.
In terms of mosquito control, there's a product called Mosquito Guns, which has a bacterial component to it, which is harmless to birds or humans. Supposedly, in the water, it kills the mosquitoes while they're breeding. Do you have any experience as to whether that's effective at all? And the second part of my question is, how still does water have to be if you're killing the mosquito? Other than a pail is obviously still, but like fountains that have eddies and quiet parts and moving parts.
Okay. So I think what you're talking about in the first part for mosquito control is using like the BTI toxin.
Right.
And those have been shown to be effective. And you can even buy those like versions of that from your home. Like I think those little donut things will have it. And yes, those have been shown to be effective as long as you're like targeting a spot where there actually are mosquito larvae. And then in regards to the stillness of water, I think it depends on the species again. So Culex pipiens likes these like small containers where water is going to be still. But then there's other ones that are more adapted to rural or more natural environments that may choose something like a wetland is pretty common, but even then you're going to see the larvae right around the edge, not in the middle. So I think also the depth of the water plays a role. They want it shallow so it can be warm enough for them.
What is the most representative version of malaria that we have on the Western Hemisphere? And have we seen that move north, like through Central America, Mexico, and possibly North America?
So a disease representative of malaria?
Yeah, there's different kinds, right?
Yeah. So in regards to the actual like parasite, so malaria is a parasite. We actually have a disease carried by ticks called babesiosis that looks really similar to the malaria parasite, but the way the disease like is presenting itself isn't really the same. In the US, our biggest arbovirus disease, so our mosquito-borne, vector-borne disease, is West Nile virus, and that did spread pretty rapidly. If we have something like dengue or chikungunya showing up, that's going to be pretty worrisome to people. But another thing that is interesting about these tropical diseases is in the US, we have better cultural practices in a way. So we have houses with window screens and air conditioning. And this is seen as a big protective factor in keeping out mosquitoes and preventing disease. So I think I went a little off topic, but if you have anything else you want to ask, let me know. Yeah?
So in those, I guess, time snapshots, maps, what is the frequency by which you're sampling, these catch sites around Seattle?
Okay, so how often we're sampling?
Yeah, so like each of those snapshots, how much time is each one described?
Yeah, so we typically sample once a week. And so when I was showing going through Seattle with the circles, that was like each week throughout the summer. And I mean, you can get more data if you sample daily, but oftentimes a week is seen as a good amount of time to get a good measure of what's going on.
And is that enough to make predictive models of these behavior? Like, if we were supposed to, or say, looking up the circuit that can automatically count the mosquitoes, so you don't have to do it by hand, would that contribute significantly to, your ability to make?
Yeah. So measuring on the weekly scale has definitely been used in many models and has been effective. Yeah.
In any group of people sitting around at a picnic or outside in the summer, some people get attacked more often than others.
Yeah.
One theory that seems to have some currency is the level of blood sugar that some people have as opposed to others. The idea being, if there's more blood sugar in one person, that person is more likely to attract the mosquitoes. Is there any truth to that, or
Yeah.
is that something you study?
So that's not something I specifically study, but like a lot of people are always asking me that. And I think the only thing we can really say up to this point is that, like we do with the traps, they're attracted to carbon dioxide, so breathing out. So that should theoretically put people at risk who maybe were just exercising, or people who are heavier and are breathing out more. I don't know that the blood sugar has any scientific weight to it at this point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm having some post-traumatic stress during your presentation. I lived around here for about 40 years, but I lived in Philadelphia when I was a kid, and then 4 years in college. I grew up in South Florida,
Ooh.
and I did my internship in New Orleans. So I was like in a mosquito, heaven, and it's been great to be out here. I noticed that in West Seattle on your map there's hardly any, which was where I live.
Okay.
Any thoughts about that? And the other thing is, where do the mosquitoes fit in the ecosystem in a quote-unquote positive way? So that the issue about human impacts and eradication and keeping them in check, starts to have other implications.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so West Seattle, I wondered about that too when we were sampling, and then even in other years it seemed not to have that many.
Yeah, I mean, hardly any. But
Yeah. I'm not sure why, but you guys are lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in the ecosystem thing, I have heard people talk about, like, if you just wipe them out, will it really matter? I know that they're like a source of food for some other predators and such, but I really can't say what role they play in regards to ecosystem balance. I think definitely getting rid of a lot of them is okay. We do that with mosquito control on a regular basis and haven't seen anything go out of whack. But maybe just keeping some around would be safe. Okay, last question.
Actually, my question does kind of go along with the ecosystem. Have you looked at how spiders impact the mosquito population?
I have not. All right, thank you everyone for coming out. Hope you enjoyed yourselves.